And that really, let's go and just go through it together. There's doesn't appear to be a way for me to, schedule to do it in class. Damien had already taken it outside of class. So log into your Brightspace and let's go through it, answer the questions together. So I believe it'd be under course content. And we have a module 2 quiz. So it should be the third one down. May not have been quite as terrible as I thought it was originally. Because there is some stuff that was talked about. And they brought up Tanzu and some other things that, at least in the PowerPoint and stuff, the instructor is supposed to go over. Give you all a second to get that pulled up. So after this class on Tuesday, we ended up with a missing mouse and dongle. The keyboard was left behind. Did anybody borrow a mouse and dongle for something? Peter that it was at, the person is not here right now. So I will ask them when they come in. I'm going to try to ask them yesterday, but they weren't here yesterday in their other class either. Of course, the room was left open, so, janitorial staff come through, but just weird that one computer's had a mouse and dongle missing. Landon doesn't remember his login. This is just the third week of class. Yes, we're picking on. Okay, so I'm starting recording. So this is going to be out of order. If you want to see these questions, like I said, do Control F and search for a couple of words in the question to jump and find it. So the main purpose of VMware tools in a virtual machine is it enhances the security of the VM. It allows the guest operating system to interact efficiently with the virtual hardware. It provides virtual devices for the VM. It manages the physical resources of the host. So what do you think?
Second one?
The longest answer on this one is correct. The guest operating system, how it installs drivers for the mouse and video card. So the big thing now is GPU processing power, being able to handle all of that. And also drivers for the networking. So efficiently with the virtual hardware is what those VMware tools allows. There's other cool stuff. There's heartbeats and things for, if a machine goes dead, crashes, and the VMware tools stop responding. There's other neat things you can do with VMware tools. It's some things you hadn't really, you need them on all virtual machines, or you're not going to be happy. So you could probably search for faster recovery. Find question number 2 on my screen. So we'll read that. Which feature of virtual machines allows for increased uptime and faster recovery from failures? So this was in the PowerPoint with multi-tenancy, rapid and consistent provisioning, live migration and fault tolerance, physical architecture. So what do you think does increased uptime of virtual machines? So physical architectures is just 32-bit or 64-bit processors. Does that have anything to do with uptime? No? That's CPU architecture. Rapid and consistent provisioning. That is deploying out new virtual machines. Does that have anything to do with uptime? No. It means existing machines continuing to run. So we're down to multi-tenancy. Have you ever heard of that? Branda's trying to think. Have I heard of that?
Never.
No, so that's probably not the answer. So live migration and fault tolerance. Fault tolerance means that you can tolerate a failure and still function. That's the definition of fault tolerance. Well, we're making up week 2 since we weren't here. The link's right on the homepage before you go into any module, very top for the IT Academy. Okay, question 3 here, probably search for the word context. We'll probably let you find where that is since they're out of order. What is overcommitting memory in the context of virtualization? So we have managing resource allocation for different operating systems, assigning a portion of physical resource to multiple VMs, sharing access to physical network cards and disk controllers, allocating more physical RAM to a VM than is available on the host. Well, 1 and 3 didn't talk about anything about RAM.
It's got to be the last one.
It's got to be.
This
okay.
doesn't even
Yeah.
talk about RAM. Which one talks about? There's only one that talks about RAM. So the last is the only thing that mentions RAM or memory. So that's got to be the answer. So yes, you can allocate more physical RAM to a VM than is available on the host. It's not a good thing. It can be done. If that VM wants to use that much RAM, you'll be doing a lot of swapping and things will really sluggish down for everything. It's possible. Overcommitting hard disk is more common than overcommitting RAM in virtualization. Okay, so number 4, probably search for managing memory. You should go find this one real quick. What is the role of the operating system in managing memory in a physical environment? So this is talking about you have Windows 11 installed on your laptop. What is Windows 11 role in managing memory? I'm not talking about any type of virtualization because it says physical environment. Single OS on a physical server. So get that mindset. The operating system handles address translation between virtual and physical memory spaces. The operating system allocates memory pages to virtual machines on the first access. That's about virtualization. That's not about physical. The operating system assumes ownership of all the physical memory in the system. The operating system creates a contiguous addressable memory space for virtual machines. Again, that's talking about virtual machines, and that's not what the question is. The second is a virtual machines, which is not what the question is. And this one up here is talking about virtual, which is not what the question is. So that leaves us with only one choice. The operating system assumes ownership of all the physical memory in the system. A lot of times you can eliminate two answers in a multiple choice test pretty quickly. And then you choose two. This one we're able to eliminate three okay-ishly. Let's search for hypervisor. That might be used more than one time, but how does the hypervisor manage the allocation of physical resources to VMs? What do you think?
By assigning VMs its own region of memory.
So you can overcommit. So that's not all the time true. You can make number one. You can alter some stuff and sort of make number one true, but that's not.
So it's the equal resources one then?
Yep. So by
'Cause
default,
I would have
without
guessed the
any
first one too.
additional configuration, and we'll get to a section, we'll even look at the shares. There's actually a particular value assigned to all VMs, and you can change it off of it's like normal, I think it is, or medium. They've changed the name over the versions. They got low, medium, high, or low, normal, high. But by default, everything's given the equal share. So if they both want to use something, they have to share it. If you had siblings, you didn't want to share with your sibling, but the hypervisor is the parent, makes them share. 6. In which industry can vSphere bit fusion? So you could definitely search for bit fusion. Be used to optimize factory workflow and supply chain logistics. What industry deals with supply chain? You know,
Manufacturing and shipping.
manufacturing and shipping. That's just kind of, do you know what industries exist in the world? Or have you been playing Roblox and watching YouTube all your life and don't understand how Walmart gets its stuff to sell? That's kind of a weird question, but vSphere Plus. What's included with vSphere Plus? Developer services. What do you think?
Global inventory service.
No? It's an okay guess. It'd be the weird one. If you don't know, what are you supposed to choose on a multiple choice? The longest answer, right? If you look at that like, I have no clue, you should pick the longest answer. In this case, the longest answer is the correct answer. Tanzu Mission Control Essentials. Tanzu is the Kubernetes and Docker. Kubernetes and Docker are specifically designed to develop containers, which are applications to run instead of virtualization. But it's sort of a virtualization, but the application runs all by itself in a container, just the libraries and code for the application to run without an operating system underneath it. I mean, you do have the hypervisor, the OS that's running the Docker service, but you don't have to roll out a whole virtual machine and worry about the patches and stuff for the underlying operating system and the application running inside that virtual machine. You just have the Docker container, the app running. So Tanzu is their developer and Kubernetes Docker services provided with vSphere Plus. So Docker was designed for rapid development. And Tanzu is just their product name for that, for the fit on top of Docker. That's an advertising marketing question right there. Where can you access the vSphere client? You remember there was two different type of clients on the slide? What were the two different type of clients? Do you remember? Of course, one's being the vSphere client. What was the other one? What? vSphere host client. They're both pretty, one of them just has an extra word in it. So you have vSphere host client, and then you have vSphere client. So it's good to know those two. That can help us with question 8. So this is just talking about the vSphere client, not the vSphere host client. So what is a host? I think that was on the first couple of slides in chapter 2. The definition of everything, like an operating system, a guest, a host. We got all of that. So remember, a host is the hypervisor at actual Blade server that's run in ESX. And it's not asking about the vSphere host client. So what can we eliminate up here?
XE, since it's not XE.
Yeah, the ESXIs. You can eliminate the two ESXIs because those would be the host. We're looking for the vSphere client. That's what connects into the vCenter server. And now we have two options up there. Do you remember how we got into our vCenter VC10? I had you log into it. What did you have to type? Did you have to type numbers? You remember? Did you have to type a colon and a number at the end, or did you just type the web server name? The UI was, we didn't have to type the UI at all, put that on the end. So you would probably recognize if you had to put a colon and change the port number. Most websites run on port 80 and 443. The browser will automatically detect those and pull up the web page. If it runs on another port number is when you have to put a colon and a different port number at the end. So we've not done that yet. So we can eliminate A. We've already eliminated ESX. So C, you just type the vCenter server, host name and domain name in there, or its IP address. It's running a certificate, so it's better to use the domain name because that's normally what the certificate registers off of, is the name and not the IP address. So we typed in vc10.csnt.edu. We will be installing vCenter server. We might start it today, potentially. We probably have time. Number 9, how does the hypervisor handle CPU resources when multiple VMs are running on an ESX host? It's probably not number 9 on yours. You probably search for CPU resources or handle space CPU to find that question. So this is the hypervisor controlling the CPU going to the virtual machines.
It's gotta be D.
So you say it's got to be D. The host time slices physical processors across all VMs. That probably sounds right. Let's look at the others. Adding physical CPUs to the host. Well, the hypervisor is software. It only a human or a robot. I guess they could have some AI robots now could actually physically open a computer and put more physical CPUs inside of it. That's typically human interaction. Definitely not the hypervisor software. AI has not gotten quite that far yet. Each VM is allocated a physical CPU for exclusive use. No. You could force that, but that's not the hypervisor's job. That's a human interaction that would have to take place. The VMs compete for CPU resources without any intervention from the hypervisor. Well, the hypervisor controls everything, so it's not like a riot and the police are running away because they're afraid. But I probably shouldn't have that recorded in Zoom. Oh well. So yes, you're correct. That's the only one. Time slice physical processors across all VMs. Which graphics card brands are supported by VMware for configuring VMs with virtual GPUs? So you probably search for virtual GPUs, find this question. Who is Intel a video card manufacturer? Do you go out and buy an Intel graphics card to play games with?
No.
No. What about Qualcomm? You go buy a Qualcomm video card? I know a lot of y'all are gamers, so
Definitely not.
what's the answer?
NVIDIA and AMD.
NVIDIA and AMD. That's something that most of all would probably be like, yeah, I know who makes video cards. If you didn't, you need to be a little bit more nerdy. Number 11, how do VMs communicate? So you can probably search for VMs and communicate to find this one with each other in a virtualized environment. So this is virtual machines communicating with another virtual machine.
The virtual switches.
Probably that's the best answer. That's what they're looking for. Even though C could potentially be true if the virtual machines are running on separate hosts. But B is the intent of this question. So when you have two potentially correct answers, you go like, well, who wrote this question? What is the intent? You got to try to imagine the thought process of the person writing the question sometimes. So there's two things that could go true on there. Spanning tree protocol, that's just something Cisco switches use to stop loops. A doesn't make any type of sense, really. So B and C could work, but B, the correct one. They can communicate through a virtual switch internally on the same host. If the virtual machine was on another host, of course, it would have to go outside through a physical switch and then into the other host. Hopefully we'll get that one graded correctly. I'm pretty sure that's the right answer. 12. Difference between CPU virtualization and software emulation. I did talk about that. Did you remember what I discussed? The difference between emulation and virtualization? Read those. Which one do you think's the correct one?
A.
I know I can install a 32-bit guest OS, but this is x64. I think this x64, I think is too limiting because you can virtualize a 32-bit operating system.
D.
Emulation is definitely not performance, and it doesn't provide native execution. CPU virtualization runs instructions only when needed, while software emulation runs programs on different computer systems. So Motorola to x86 or x64, yes, emulation is simulating a different processor, a different computer system. So that part is true. We're just looking at the emulation stuff. So this down here, emulation emphasizes performance. That's false. Software emulation provides native execution. That's false because it's not native. You're not on the chip. This is kind of true for emulation down here, but the first part about the 64-bit, that 64-bit's not exclusive. It's 32 or 64-bit. So software emulation runs programs on a different computer system. That's true. CPU virtualization runs instructions only when needed. Yeah, because your guest OS doesn't always need to be doing something. It can just be in sleeping mode. You can watch Task Manager, and sometimes it'll be, down like 0% CPU utilization. Those lots of clock cycles there that even if you got 10% utilization on your processor, that's 90% of the time the processor can be turned off doing nothing and not heating up the system. So C on that one. That A was really tricky. It was a pretty decent answer, but it was too restrictive on the x64 part. So you can find this one. What is the role of the hypervisor in virtualization?
A.
A looks pretty darn good. Yep. So I've also noticed that the answers are also out of order. Provide
Yeah,
physical hardware resources to VMs. Yes. So don't be clicking A, B, C, D, matching mine. Look and see which one it is on yours. It's probably different. Hopefully y'all been doing that. Moving virtual disks between different types of storage. That would be storage vMotion. Allocating memory to applications. That would be handled by the guest operating system. Interacting directly with hardware components. That would also be with the guest operating system. So 14, which of the following is, of course, it's not 14 on yours, but which of the following is a challenge posed by the traditional model of running physical servers in a data center?
Limited rack space.
That sounds
Is
pretty
that
darn good. Limited rack space is definitely a problem with running because you have so many blade servers.
the only answer that's actually a challenge?
Yeah, that's what I noticed. It's literally the only thing that is a problem. Everything else is like, this is good. This is good. This is
Quick provisioning, no. Efficient resource utilization, no. Cost-effective infrastructure planning, no, 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 no. That's the negative, and this is what is bad about physical servers. All of these are positive for virtualization. And this is the negative for running a physical data center. Like I said, Dillard's had like 40,000 square feet of data center packed full of servers and racks. And then they had a quarter of one room, probably about 5,000 square feet of servers after they virtualized. '15, the Department of Information Services too. Their data centers shrunk down drastically. So this question, what is the main advantage of VM isolation? I don't think this was part of chapter 2, PowerPoint. So isolation is a term that comes into play when you're talking about high availability and fault tolerance, and where that you're trying to tolerate or recover from some type of failure, hard disk failure, host failure, or a networking failure. So VM isolation. So I talked about fault tolerance and high availability. So up here, the things we can eliminate. Demilitarized zone is with security. It's nothing to do with fault tolerance and high availability of the virtual machine. Live migration is, that just mean you're moving a machine, doesn't really mean anything about a fault or something broke. Lisa's with A and D up here. The reduction in recovery time from failures through fault tolerance. That doesn't sound like VM isolation to me. It sounds like system failed and the secondary, basically fault tolerance. You have two virtual machines synced with each other running on two separate hosts. So if one host fails or network fails or anything fails, including the hard disk, or synced to another NAS attached box, if any one component fails, the execution switches over. So we've not covered any of that yet. It's later on down what fault tolerance is. I believe that eliminates number 1. because VM isolation doesn't have anything to do with the secondary virtual machine taking over when the primary one failed. Consistent access the performance during guest operating system failures. That sounds kind of funky too. Don't really like this question and the answers. So VM isolation, let me tell you what VM isolation actually is. When networking has failed and the vCenter server can't determine if the virtual machine is still actually running somewhere, maybe somebody kicked the network cables out, the virtual machine can become isolated. So they've got to try to figure out, do I need to boot that virtual machine up again from the storage on another host because I can't see it? Or is it still actually running and just the network cable is plugged out and I can't ping it anymore? That's how a VM can become isolated. So there's some techniques to like scanning the NAS itself to see if the hard disk is still being changed by the guest operating system to determine if it's network isolated or what needs to happen. And that's normally occurred when a cable gets disconnected, a switch fails, rat chews a cable into, or a squirrel. I always use squirrel because I've had a squirrel chew cable into in the attic of a school. I don't really like that answer, but that's the correct answer they're looking for. And the others don't match. That's the only thing that's the closest answer. And we will cover, there'll be a whole section on fault tolerance, high availability and stuff later on. That's why I didn't like this quiz. There were some questions in here which you're not going to cover until later. But it's okay, talk about it now. We're learning. You'll be ready to think about it when we hit those chapters. 16. Virtual switches forward frames at the physical layer. What do you think? Are virtual switches physical switches? No. We'll go false. Consistent access and performance during guest operating system failures.
But we all agree that one's kind of sketchy.
Yeah, that one's kind of sketchy. So I really see this as an answer to high availability application monitoring. So with VMware tools installed, you can configure VMware tools heartbeat and you can configure it to monitor like Windows services or Linux services. So if you have a web server running, it's a lot of configuration to go in and set that up, but you can configure it to monitor specific process like Nginx, daemon, Nginx-D or whatever. And if the thing becomes non-responsive, you've looked at Task Manager and you've seen processes become, non-responsive before, then it can it'll reboot the whole entire virtual machine. So that's part of high availability. So I just don't really like that with VM isolation. That doesn't seem to match up with that. It seemed to match up with application monitoring with high availability. So this seems like it goes to a different question, but The other three are definitely not an answer to this. And it's the longest answer, so it's the one we're gonna go with. Because the other three are not the answer. 16's false, virtual switches, that's everything virtual, it's not. They're not sent at the physical layer until it actually exits the virtual switch out onto a physical switch. Which data store type in vSphere uses a clustered file system? You just got a space in there. Optimized for virtual machines. You did better typing than what I can do typing a test. So what is a clustered file system? What two letters do you see whenever you know it's a file system typically? FS. So we can instantly eliminate two up there pretty quickly. So which file system is optimized for virtual machines?
And VM stands for virtual machine. So
Yes.
VMFS, virtual machine file system. How much was something obvious?
Yep, that's correct. Virtual machine file system is designed for virtual machines. Yes. Since VMware was one of the very first companies to do virtualization, they got to also name their file system virtual machine file system. So that's pretty cool. Proprietary loadout for them. Network file system is the other. That one is preferred to throw backups on to store ISO images and maybe templates and stuff on, things that aren't going to be running production, things you want to pull from to build out your infrastructure. It's a shared folder on a Unix system. You can share a folder using NFS on a Windows server, but that is not stable, and you will not have a good time trying to set up a Windows server as in the NFS protocol to share stuff out. You can use Windows Connect to a Linux NFS share with that protocol, but you don't want to make the Windows server actually be an NFS server. It sucks. And it's been that way since the mid-90s, probably even before that. But I started playing with all this stuff in the mid-90s, 96, 97, 98. It, as of 2-3 years ago, it was still crashing and terrible. NFS on Windows. I always install out a Linux server and use it there. Not ever had any trouble with that. Never had a Windows machine up for more than 2 weeks with NFS running. Now, SMB shares, yeah, the Microsoft made that, and that's their bread and butter. They designed for Windows shares, but they've never put a lot of effort into keeping NFS working. Okay, we're back to vSphere Plus support. What types of workload does vSphere Plus support? So vSphere Plus is the hybrid cloud management interface. This one probably looks like the longest answer, traditional workloads and the Docker container stuff. We've already had a previous question about vSphere Plus and Tanzu as the developer for containers. It didn't say containers with Tanzu, but that is its Docker container automation. So you're not manually deploying out Docker containers with the Docker command. So that answer has the word container in it. And vSphere Plus supports containers and virtual machines, which are what's considered traditional workloads. So yep, that would be the answer, both traditional workloads and modern workloads based on containers. You can pack on an additional like 20 to 80% containers versus virtual machines. So even more cost savings containerizing your applications. 19. Which component of vSphere acts as the central administration platform for ESXi host, virtual machines, storage, and networking?
vCenter.
You should know that one. You said, wait, which one did you say?
vCenter.
vCenter, yes. So, yep, correct. ESXi is the hypervisor, and we also have hypervisor. So, hypervisor and ESXi are the same thing. vSphere is like saying Microsoft Office. It's the whole entire suite. It's not any particular product. vCenter is the central administration product of vSphere. So yeah, vSphere contains ESXi and vCenter, but vCenter is the administrated platform. vSphere Plus is a subscription-based offering that brings the benefits of cloud to on-premises workloads. What do you think?
True.
True. It's hybrid cloud capabilities. Don't matter the number, but anyway, the next one here, almost done. How does virtualization impact the provisioning process compared to physical servers? I believe they're looking for the benefits of virtualization over the problems of physical servers. What requires lengthy hardware procurement? Physical servers, right? So it's looking for the benefits of virtualization, not the benefits of physical servers. So there's a problem here. That's not would not be the answer. We're looking for a positive. We're looking for the positive of virtualization over physical servers. So we've eliminated number one. What are the other three? Graphical user interface for quick provisioning. That sounds pretty good. It's not the longest answer, but you do create templates and you can quickly right click and go create a virtual machine from this template and deploy out virtual machines off of it. So that would be the correct answer on that one.
Do it.
Relies on graphical user interface for quick provisioning. You've not done it yet, but you will. You'll also hopefully see that it's those that remember LAN 1 class and how we had to create the differencing disk and run sysprep with generalize and all that convoluted, complex, huge stepped out process. When we get to deploying out virtualization and using templates, I think you'll see how much better VMware is over the Hyper-V method. How does deploying desktops as a managed service benefit businesses? Huh, there's nothing above all of the above. That's where when you randomize the answers, it kind of breaks the question, but I'm going to assume that all of the above should have been at the very bottom.
Oh, me too.
So for now, I'm going to click all of the above, and then we're going to see, is that going to be correctly? Are these positives? We're looking for positives. Boosting efficiency and agility. That sounds like a positive. Reducing IT expensive. That sounds positive. Responding more quickly to changing needs and opportunities. That sounds pretty positive. So it's asking for what are benefits? I'm reading three things that sound positive to me. I haven't really paid attention to what they're saying, but they sound positive, so it probably all of them above. What do you think? We're going to go with all of the above? Yep. Like you just went to the thesaurus and looked up some positive words and threw in there. That's basically what they did. Let's see, it's 23. Which tool is used for managing individual ESXi hosts directly when vCenter server is unavailable? Another question we answered almost at the very top. Kind of helps answer this question. What's the answer, Brianna? What? The vSphere client? But the vCenter server is unavailable. And that's where you get the vSphere client from. What? The ESXi shell? So you can't really manage through the shell too much. That gives you a DOS bash shell prompt for looking at the file system. What do you think, John? We've eliminated vSphere client and ESXi shell.
VMware host client.
The what?
The VMware host client.
Yep. That's the first thing we logged into after we installed ESXi. Well, we went to direct command line user interface, that orange and grayish looking screen, set the IP address up. Then we went to our web browser and we accessed, that was the VMware host client is the first thing we accessed. And the vSphere client's what we accessed on Tuesday. We logged into vc10.csnt.edu. You've seen that there was 3 hosts underneath there. There was a couple of virtual machines, the Active Directory domain controller, an NFS Linux server. I think Brent and Vaughn's virtual machine was still out there running. I was using as a experimental system. So that was the VMware host client. I've had to do that when we have power outages on campus and the vCenter server didn't start up or the DNS server didn't start up on the Active Directory. So that meant the vCenter server could never find itself. Yeah, even though it's booted, like I can't find myself because the DNS server doesn't tell me who I am or where I am. So that's weird, but computers don't know who they are if they can't ping their name.
The answer is VMware host client.
Yep. So the vCenter server is down. I've had to log into the VMware host client on the ESXi host that the Sometimes I don't know which one they're on. I have to log into ESX 10, 11, and 12 and find where's my Active Directory server running. Sometimes boot it up if it didn't start, or restart it if it's hung on something, and restart the vCenter server. Wait for them to come up online. Once they're online, I want to go back to the vSphere client. There's a lot more capabilities on it. How does the VMware virtualization layer handle memory in a virtualized environment? What do you think? This one's a darn tough question. I don't think that's the answer. All of these start with the word it, doesn't it? What did you say your answer was?
Windows address translation.
So that would be the guest operating system. The guest operating system like Windows or Linux has a page file.sys or a swap partition. And when you launch applications within the guest OS, it will translate stuff between physical and virtual. So that one is not what the virtualization layer does. Was that the longest answer we eliminated? Yep. So it's not that one. We had an earlier question about a physical guest OS, assuming ownership of all physical memory in the system. That was the answer to a previous question, so we can also eliminate the last one. So now we have between A and B. They both look pretty accurate. Both look like they could be the answer. B is kind of more what happens with thin or dynamic disk instead of RAM. So the correct answer is A. Configures the virtual address space for each VM when they start up. And the reason it's that, why is it virtual address space? Because when a virtual machine starts up and it's given X amount of RAM, RAM's going to be indexed or started counting like 0 up to however many gigs of RAM you have. And if you start telling a system like Windows or Linux that RAM starts like way above the beginning, it's going to be really confused. Like, wait, what happened to my first RAM stick should be index 0, and last RAM stick should be, index at 16 gig mark or something like that. So the virtual address space for each VM is given to the guest OS when it starts. 25, which of the following are cluster features? Select all that apply. We've not set up a cluster yet. This should be asked way on down the line when we actually go and set up a cluster. So just take some wild guesses. There's 2 correct answers. What do you think, Landon? Well, that's the, so ESXiOS cluster is the name of the feature, but it's not, or the name of the cluster, but it's not actually a feature of the, it's just like, it's not actually a feature. So now we're down to 3. Brianna, what do you think? Distributed resource scheduler is part of the cluster features, in that it can auto migrate virtual machines based on workload or CPU utilizations of other hosts that aren't so busy. There's one of them. Caleb, what do you think the last one is? Yeah, one of these middle 2. So you can actually vMotion without cluster installed. And that's moving either the hard disk or running state of a machine to another. It is the feature utilized if DRS is enabled, but it's not locked. You can do it without a cluster, so it's not specifically a cluster only. That leaves us with high availability. High availability is when you add virtual or you add your ESXi host into a cluster. Those ESXi hosts are now being monitored for heartbeat and uptime. If one of them was to die, then one of the other ESXi hosts in that cluster can start the virtual machines up. So that's high availability. There is a little bit of downtime with high availability, HA. But it is a specific cluster feature. If you don't have your host in a clustered feature, they're not monitored. If one of them dies, there's nothing saying, hey, these other systems are pals and they can run the workload of this failed system. So the feature of the cluster is to divide the workload out amongst all the ESXi hosts, and if somebody dies, to have one of the other systems take over the workload. And that how society works. Somebody dies, like, we won't hire a new employee, we'll just give everybody else more work. Hopefully they didn't die. Hopefully they were just fired or laid off. Now you got to do their job too. All my stuff goes to IT staff getting run over in by a train in the car on the way to lunch or something weird like that.
You're at the first question.
First few up here. So VMware tools allowed efficient the guest OS to interact with the hardware. And we have live migration and fault tolerance to allow for faster recovery. Then you had allocating more physical RAM. So if y'all submit that, is that 100%? What?
Yeah.
I got 20.
Which one did we miss?
CPU virtualization and software emulation. It was Delton's answer. Delton was right.
The 64-bit up here?
Yep. That's what it says is the correct answer.
Let's go. Is that the only one that was missed?
Yeah, it was the only one that was missed.
Yep. Should be. So that's the answer. I don't like that answer. I don't necessarily like the one I chose either. Printed out this test. Let me see if I can find. Here that one is pets. Okay, I do have that on my printout when I answered it.
I think the reason they marked that one as correct is because it specifically says supports 64-bit processors rather than limiting it to only 64-bit processors. If it limited it there, then it probably would have been wrong.
It's probably a tedious grammatical thing in there. Yep. When you miss a question because you're not totally a grammar Nazi. And then what happens when we're going to get to a question where they actually are grammatically incorrect? And like, wait a second. Okay, the last two up, what, 5, 4, and 5?
Yeah.
Those two. I'll resume recording. So we finished up that quiz. So I got my answer I needed that won't ever show me. At least I can't find a way to see what that y'all do on those quizzes. They look like good quizzes to do, did in class. And I'm looking at the next quiz. It shows the due date of February 13th. I think we might be ready for that quiz before February 13th. But we'll see. We need to start building out a study guide yourself. So I suggest your OneDrive and creating a document. This says study guide for quiz module 2 and 3. I suggest adding to it and definitely suggest doing that right now. So I'd open up either your Office 365 Word app or on a computer or something. I'd definitely put it up in your so going not to Outlook. It's not, I'm already in Outlook. Suggest going into Word, saving a blank document. And it will auto save it to your OneDrive. You can give it a new name like maybe like study guide VM 2 and 3, something like that. That's what I would suggest. Anywhere that you want to create a document or save it and start taking notes and stuff, you can type out. So that way the day or two before the quiz, you can go back and review all of the stuff and remember what are the key points for the quiz. Also, any other classes you take or continue to take if you go on further up to, if you have Google Docs or OneDrive and access, you can just type out your notes in class. So I don't need to take notes. Not really, I don't guess, nope. But I suggest you typing in notes here. So I would keep that up and going as we run through. So installing and configuring ESXi. So what is important about ESXi? Well, it's VMware's virtualization platform. You find it in lots of companies, especially larger size companies. You'll definitely find VMware. Create and run virtual machines. How do you properly configure, set up, monitor the whole entire data center, and make sure everything continues to run smoothly, and keep up with your life cycle, upgrading versions and stuff, and new features as the coders are writing stuff, maybe even faster since we got AI helping people code and come up with even new products faster. Mind-boggling speed. Security and performance. They misspelled performant. I like that, performant. You see that up there? Performant. It should be performance, but it looks like I typed this out. I didn't. Somebody, I would have a little bit worse. But anyway, I can't complain. Yeah, I can. I can make fun of other people. Makes me feel better about how bad I do it. And that what happened? Bullies make themselves look good. And that's why I have a cap on my cup. Knocked it over.
It's module 2 or 3.
This is starting module 3. So the module lessons, install and configure ESXi. Hadn't come anything with notes yet for you. I'll tell you when there's a note to write down. So describe the architecture. There's definitely going to be a note on architecture when we get there. Navigate to direct console user interface or direct command line user interface. It used to be direct command line user interface. They've changed it to direct console user interface. To configure an ESXi host. Recognize the user account best practice, install an ESXi host and configure an ESXi host setting. So direct console user interface sounds better. Has it been wrong in my brain for 13, 14 years? Or have they just renamed it to direct console? It makes more sense to be a direct console. Than direct command line user interface. Direct console user interface. I think I've just had it wrong in my head for that long. So that makes a lot more sense because it is a console. You have your menu up, down screen. You can log in. That orange and grayish screen. Okay, this slide. ESXi, it's a bare metal hypervisor. That means you have to install it onto a blank server. Nothing's virtualized. It installs directly into the hardware. So whereas in VirtualBox is not a bare metal hypervisor. You have to have Linux or Mac OS X or Windows pre-installed before you can install VirtualBox and create virtual machines. So it is not bare metal. ESXi is bare metal. It is the hypervisor you install directly into the server, you don't have any other operating system pre-installed. That's what bare metal means. And it's licensed. It's part of the whole vSphere. There's a free version that you can get, and it's a standalone server. All the external API and management cool stuff that you can do is turned off. Those DLLs are not loaded into RAM when you run the free version. You can log into it with the vSphere host client only and use the vSphere host client web interface to create machines. There's no cluster service. There's no vMotion. You can create a virtual machine on there, attach it to a network card, and let it get out to the internet. There's no advanced data center features, but you can run it for free. And it does a better job of memory management. So you can actually run more virtual machines than you could in Hyper-V or VirtualBox or a VMware player or any of the other stuff. It would be more efficient. And your machines would run a little bit faster. But it is something that you would set off in the closet or keep in your garage. It's not something you'd go to because you'd go to it to a web interface. You wouldn't need a keyboard and mouse. All you would see is the direct console user interface, and you can't create virtual machines there. That makes sense? But you can play with it for free forever. So here's a note. Here's a note on here. The licensed version where you can do everything. How long do you have to evaluate ESXi before you have to provide a license? It could be a paid license or it could be the free license, but how long can you run and create virtual machines and use it? You definitely want that in your notes. So there's your first note. How many days? How many days can you evaluate VMware products? I know y'all seen it, and I know y'all talked about it before the snow when we first installed it and logged into the host. They even said, hey, what's this little warning message on the screen? You know, oh, well, you can evaluate this for X number of days. Do you remember how many days that was? Anybody?
30?
60. $60 days. There's a warning about that question that you might also put in your notes. I use that sometimes as a filler question just so that I have more points on the test. So like if I come up with 7 questions and like, well, I actually want the test to be 10 questions long, I might put that question on there three times to make it 10 questions long. So if you don't know the answer to that question, you could really, really bomb the test. So that 60-day is one of those like give me free type, should be free points out there. You definitely it's like 60 days. Like, okay, Goodman said no 60 days. So I'll get points every time I know that answer. The first quiz is only 8 questions, and I have that on there twice. It's because I was lazy writing questions. So that's a good thing to put in your notes. If you care about the other students that maybe not going to watch the entire Zoom thing and catch this, you might want to warn them about that question. Okay, so ESXi is a bare metal hypervisor. You can evaluate it for 60 days. Then you do have to put either a paid license on it, or you can get a free license. It'll lock it down to being a standalone system, but it will continue to operate and run virtual machines. If you don't put a license on the system at the end of the 60-day trial, the virtual machines will be shut down and you cannot start them. It will allow you to log in and get to the licensing feature to put in a license code, but it won't let you do anything else. Key features of ESXi here. High security. So ESXi is Linux-based kernel, which has built-in firewall. Memory hardening. So VMware has added some extra drivers and stuff into the Linux kernel to harden the memory. Kernel module integrity. They utilize the trusted platform module. So that's a hardware chip on most motherboards that can contain certificates. And they can also keep track of like the secure boot and stuff, so that while the system's offline, people can't tamper with the bootloader and things like that. That can be signature based or the trusted platform module, TPM. So it's a hardware chip that helps keep track of things that's installed into the hard drive. UEFI, secure boot. Another feature that helps the bootloader and the Linux kernel from being tampered with while it's offline. Encrypted core dumps. So when a crash happens and the system has to stop functioning because software got some bad data or garbled, it can't continue on, the hard drive or piece of hardware starting to fail. When it dumps that out to the hard drive, it will be encrypted. So you'll have to know the decryption key to be able to look at that, so I can't steal or force core dumps. It has been a security thing where if a hacker could get in and he's trying to steal information like passwords and security keys out of the system, they have run techniques where they'll send a kill command, but they'll tell it, hey, just core dump the application. Maybe not actually kill the application, but dump all the memory to a file. They'll steal that file, and sometimes they will find keys and passwords that are not encrypted in RAM. They may be encrypted on the hard drive, but once it's put into RAM to be processing, it can be unencrypted. So that's a security addition. Small disk footprint. Yeah, you're less than 32 gig, and you can have a whole system running. I've got 32 gig SD cards slid into a couple servers, and I've got ESXi or also my NASs. I got the true NAS installed into a 32 gig card. And if you're alive back in the DOS days when you had 20 meg hard drives, and 32 gigs enormous, but quick boot for faster patching and upgrades. And we have, of course, the quick boot is, you know, our servers have to have like a 3-minute post, so that's not quick. Most big blades have a long post to read all the sensors and stuff and get them up and going. So we have installable on a hard disk, on a storage area network, on a LUN that's dedicated only to that one host. You can install into an SSD, a SATA DOM, a diskless host. Have you seen these SATA DOMs before? Y'all seen these things? Y'all ever seen this? and a hard drive, an SSD hard drive that plugs into the SATA port. Notice there's no cables that plug into an external drive. You may have messed with legacy platter drives, SSDs, where did you have to run a SATA cable out to them, and the hard drive is screwed into the case somewhere. So look at these SATA DOM things. There's no cable. They just plug directly into the board.
Like a flash drive for hell.
So I didn't know if you'd noticed those existed, but yeah, that's kind of cool. Benefit of these is, well, you don't have, even though the SATA cable's thin, it still restricts airflow. So this right here is even better there's no extra long cables actually interrupting airflow in the system. A lot less space, great for those pizza box servers, those real thin ones. So if you've installed into a SAN LUN, that means it's a diskless host. SAN LUN means you have a hardware-based adapter, kind of like an ILO or a DRAC card, almost like that, where that you can go into the BIOS configuration of your network adapter and set the configuration up where they can communicate to an outside SAN and boot from it. So you're going to have a system completely with no hard disk or SSDs or thumb or anything. Why do they do that? If the blade goes bad, you can slap another blade in there, go to the NIC card and tell it to boot from that LUN that you just threw away the old server to, and you don't have to worry about moving hard drives or anything. That's neat. And yes, that's been done all the way back into the 90s before virtualization existed. So that's nothing new. ESXi installation requirements. So there's probably a second note to take down for the quiz. It's probably on here, should be on here anyway. So there's minimum hardware configuration requirements to install ESXi 8.0. So supported server platform. What does that mean? It means you're going to be running, big note here, 64-bit CPU only. That's your note. It requires 64-bit architecture. You cannot run a 32-bit chip. I don't think anybody's really putting out a 32-bit chip anymore, but 64-bit only. ESXi. That's your supported server platform, a little bit beyond just 64-bit platform. It has to be on their hardware compatibility list. So a 64-bit Intel Xeon server chip from 2009 is not going to be supported. Intel has added extra circuitry for security onto the chips that they have coded into the kernel, like that memory hardening and stuff that was displayed on the prior page. So a lot of that features have been hardwired into the physical processors. So you have to have a modern 64-bit chip, one that's basically 10 years old or less. So they support Intel Xeon chips, and they support AMD EPYC and AMD Opteron chips. Those are starting to get outdated, the Opterons, since AMD's moved their platform. Their upgraded platform from Opteron is AMD EPYC. If anybody's been watching Linus Tech Tips and stuff, they've been running speed tests on the AMD EPYC chips. And like, look how many cores this thing has, drilling over the servers. So if you get an i7 chip, it's not supported. They support just the server branded Xeon at certain levels of instruction set and higher. But for your notes, 64-bit only.
That is the ESXi server platform,
Yep,
supports 64-bit only,
yes.
64-bit. What exactly? RAM?
No, that's RAM is in megabytes and gigabytes. 64-bit is the size, the number of lanes that you can send. It's how many bits you can send at a time to for the processor to execute. So 64-bit instructions or words. It's like a bigger mouth.
I thought processing power was measured in megahertz.
That's how many times per second it can do something,
Okay,
but that's not how large of a chunk it can bite at once.
okay.
They kind of go together, but the gigahertz and megahertz speed has kind of stagnated. We've been between 3 and 5 gigahertz for a decade now. So there's the 64-bit and number of cores in the system. How many 64-bit bytes so between all the cores? They used to be all 32-bit back before 2003. You have to have at least 2 cores. You have to have at least 8 gig of RAM. It says 12 gig for a production environment. The one thing about virtualization, RAM is the #1 component that allows you to put more virtual machines on your system. You'll see lots of servers that you can buy with terabytes of RAM in them. Most virtual machines need RAM versus processing power because of the just vast amount of cores and speed of modern chips. Gigabit is required. You can't run anything slower than gigabit Ethernet adapters. I will tell you that you really need to run 10 gig or faster if you're going to be wanting to push out ESXi for any customer. You will want to make sure that they are running 10 gig or faster, and you probably would have to upgrade their switch and stuff because it really needs 10 gig speed or faster. Some of the features like fault tolerance and some of the things that you can do with a cluster service has to have 10 gig or faster. Especially the connection to the storage area network. 10 gigs pretty much the minimum you'd want to run. 40 gig would be better at that. And you need at least 32 gig of storage. Like I said, 32 SD card or anything that size or better. So here's a pro tip for you, a little asterisk for all of these things. If you're going to be implementing a new ESXi system like 8.0, VMware puts out new versions every 12 to 24 months. And normally the requirements are bumped up slightly each time they come out with a new version. All the way back to ESX 4.0, you could get away with somewhere between a 4 and 8 gig SD card. Now with 8.0, it requires 32 gig. So if you want your system to be able to follow the life cycle and upgrade to like ESX9, ESX10, by that time, it's probably about 5 years, 6, 7 years down the road, and you need to upgrade your whole server. But you know, ESX10 might possibly need a 64 gig storage card. So I would double these, especially the storage minimum here. Putting out a new server today, I would put a 64 gig card at a minimum in the system. That way I could upgrade to version 9 and version 10. That makes sense? Yes. Should. So we ran through the installer. You've seen all these? You've seen this. We did it. Except the Alua. Entering the password. How to be secure. We've seen this page. It's not very pretty. Direct console user interface. We didn't do much there. We set the IP address up. They're setting up the IP address. We did this. It's fairly intuitive menuing system. There's lots of little quick YouTubes and stuff on how to set this up if you ever forget, but go in, set the password, change password, enable SSH if need be, restart management agents, not restart management network. You go under troubleshooting, restart management agents. That's somewhere in the test, not this chapter, I don't think. It's on down the line. Let me make sure it's not on this quiz. Nope, it's not on this quiz coming up. There's your troubleshooting options. You again looked at that. Now pointed out the restart management agents in there. You can control SSH in here, but you can also control that through the ESXi host client or even the vSphere client on the server. So there's no real reason to go back into this. The restart management agents is one of the, once it's installed and you got connectivity to it, that's the main reason to go back into this section. Otherwise, you never really need to go here and look. Time synchronization. Do you remember us doing that? I'm going to go to North America pool.ntp.org, something like that. We copied the pool.ntp servers, configured the ESXi host to get it to synchronize its time. But why do you want accurate time?
Processor over.
It's not the processor. Don't you want to know when an error happened? What if it happens at the same time every day? If your time is off by a few hours, you could be sitting there waiting for the error to happen and it doesn't happen during that time. Like, well, it didn't happen today. So accurate timestamps in your logs. So your performance graphs, you can tell when workload changes and you know exactly during the daytime, nighttime, whatever, when the utilization changes. Also, the virtual machines should have accurate time because they too log internally. And certain security protocols, especially Active Directory, the one Microsoft uses, requires time to be off no more than 5 minutes. Otherwise, you fail to act, it will deny resources. You can't log in, can't change passwords. So time is definitely a big thing. You don't have to worry about your virtual machines, each one of them needing to set their time. If you install VMware tools and you have your ESXi host or the vCenter server synchronizing time. So there's two ways to set this up. You could make your vCenter server synchronize its clock to all the ESXi hosts, or you could go to each ESXi host and make them set their time correctly, and then in turn pass that time to all the virtual machines. So everybody's running the same. So this eliminates the need for the virtual machines to go out on the internet and synchronize their time. I prefer the ESXi host personally to have time set up and then it synchronize the virtual machines running. That way you know everything's on the same time. But you need VMware tools installed for that to work. So manual configuration, not preferred, using NTP, that's my preferred. There's also precision time protocol. It's supposed to be microsecond timing accuracy versus millisecond timing accuracy. I don't know why you need microsecond timing accuracy. So I still like NTP. It's the most widely easy one out there. And you can only do one or the other, not both. So the big thing about NTP, the problem that we had when we go in and add in the NTP servers, you also had to change this service to start and stop either manually, that's the default. You start and stop it with a host. But even after you do that, it still doesn't kick on. I wish it did. It should. Like, okay, if we change this to start and stop with the host and save it, that script right there, that dialog box should go ahead and start NTP, but it typically doesn't. You typically need to go over to your services section, find NTPD, and actually click the play button to start it up. Just knowing that it's not intuitively automatic like that is good to know. You have to go start it. Some version, maybe they'll fix that. I guess not enough people's complained. So PPP, PTP configuration. Here's your firewall. It's on by default. All ports except for services that are running are going to be blocked by default. And then there's lockdown mode. I don't recommend lockdown mode. You can't log into the host directly. You can't open up an SSH and log directly into the system. You can't use the host client. You can only go through the vCenter server. You could go to the CUI, but any external login, except for the vCenter server and the direct command line user interface, is locked down. I'd avoid turning it on, unless your company has a policy to enable it. So security guidelines. What's your root password? What's your root password? Nope. What was your ESXi root password? Pass 1, 2, 3, 4 and say, this is not complex enough. What did we have to do to make it complex? Yeah, we put
Bada
an
bang.
exclamation point at the end. Bang. That's definitely not a secure password. You know, it's cheating. We got around their rules by putting something fairly simple in and putting a symbol at the end. So you don't want many people to have the root account. There's a lot of problems with that. One, if everybody's logging in as root, the log files are going to say root did something. And if you have more than one person in your IT department, you don't know who did what. So there's no accountability or, yeah, there's no accounting in that. So you want to secure that down and not log in as root. You want to connect it. We connected ours to Active Directory and then logged in as our admin. That's how you want to log in after you initially set it up. You know, you stage it, you install it, you get root, set the password. You log into the vSphere host client, join it to Active Directory, and then that's the last time you want to log in as root, unless you're in some type of disaster recovery troubleshooting, whereas you can't, you've lost access to Active Directory. And don't install other local accounts into the Linux kernel. Use your external database source. If you keep, that's why we use Active Directory instead of having an account on a Windows machine. You can't, break that username password. You see this ESX admins group? Didn't I show you that? You remember me showing you that? Do y'all remember anything? It's your fourth semester. Y'all gotta remember this stuff. Some things. Y'all don't remember that. Remember I said I had to create ESX space admins with the right case sensitivity there, and I added all of your accounts into it?
Yes.
So that's why you can log into the vSphere host client with your Active Directory, like admin 1A or admin 2A or all your admin accounts, and you can actually do stuff on your ESXi host. That's because you're a member of that group in Active Directory. So yeah, as soon as we joined to Active Directory and made that trust relationship between the ESXi hosts and the Windows domain, and it's seen that that group existed, that's just an automatic, hey, you've got full admin rights. Your instructor will run a demonstration. No, I made y'all do that. It's like students aren't going to learn watching. Y'all are already asleep, not paying attention to anything I'm saying. So if I demonstrated something, you'd definitely go to sleep. That's why I made y'all install, connect that ISO image, run through the install yourself. So if you're not actually clicking the stuff, you're not going to remember. I just seen one of my students walk by the door. I don't know where he went to. So lab, we've done this, right? Logged into the host client. I thought there wasn't another lab 1 in module 2. I thought there was a lab 1 and 2 in module 2. Now there's a lab 1 again in module 3. They've shuffled stuff around and shuffled slides, and pretty sure I've got stuff mixed up. So add an ESXi host to an LDAP server. We added ours to Active Directory instead of a LDAP. When they redid this curriculum, they rewrote it to where you didn't use anything Microsoft. You used all Linux and Samba, which is an Active Directory, basically compatible server on Linux. But you're going to go out in the business world and you're going to find Active Directory is what you're going to be using, not probably not an LDAP server on Linux. It is possible, but I'm trying to prep for what you might run into. So we've added the ESXi, we just click join domain, typed in our admin, Windows admin password, and it joined the domain. And then we logged in and we configured NTP client. So we've done this lab 1 already. Yay, pat yourself on the back. Both hands, good job. Caleb was clapping his fingers together. It's not patting ourselves on the back. Do you think you can install ESXi and join it to the domain and configure NTP? If you were asked.
You can give me like, an hour.
An hour with Google and YouTube? Yeah, I think you could. So key points. That orange screen, setting the IP address. Making sure everything's secure. And making sure you have time set up for time accuracy. That's the key points of this module.
I mean, sometimes all it really takes is just seeing a couple words that you recognize, and then it all kind of just comes back.
Yes, I did not like Novell class when I went through, and the instructor just read like the headings, like they'd read key points, and then they'd go to the next one and read the heading, and then they're like, do your labs and walk away. Like, what? I didn't think I learned anything out of that class, but when my first job outside was they had Novell servers everywhere. I was like, hey, this needs to be done. I'm like, oh, I don't know anything about Novell. But I would sit down like, this kind of seems familiar. And I clicked around. It's like, okay, cool. I made stuff work. It like flowed all together. So yeah, that was pretty cool. Of course, Novell finally went defunct and disappeared from the face of the earth. They become SUSE, a Linux-based company, but NetWare disappeared off the face of the earth.
Does that make you feel old?
Oh, I guess everything makes me feel old. And let's circle back to, we're going to be deploying out vCenter Server. We definitely don't have time today to deploy out vCenter Server, but we can look to see if we have the capabilities right now to push vCenter Server out. We will need to attach, and I think I want everybody to install a vCenter server, whether we're going to particularly use yours or not. We can push one out and see how to configure it up, see how to get the permissions and stuff correct on it. So I want you to all to do that. Some of them we will connect to ESXi host, but let's verify on our computers that you have the vCenter server, since it is a large file, in your ISO folder. On your hard drive. It looks like it's about close to 10 gig in size. Brianna has it. And I believe we tried to do this like the first week of class to get the vmware installer and the VCSA. So the hypervisor right here, we've already done and installed, and it was about a half a gig in size. The VCSA, do you have the version 8 on your computers? Is that on everybody's computer? I don't see it on yours, Lachlan. I can paste it on there. There you go. It's going on there now. It'll be that VCSA. It should be showing up.
Now, what is it?
So that is the vCenter server.
Does it need to be in a virtual machine or something?
We will deploy it out as a virtual machine. We will,
Well, yeah, it's an ISO. Got it. Yeah.
so we will need we'll need the Active Directory, csnt.edu, and the DNS server that's running in the class. So we'll need to attach this to a VMware class. And we can do that today. We're not going to deploy it. It takes quite a while to deploy this system out. And we'll deploy it out off onto, I think, ESX11. I'll have to double check, but I think that's my large 512 gig server. We'll push it out there. Instead of putting it onto your host. It's a whole lot easier to play with the distributed, the DRS and vMotion and Lifecycle Manager on hosts that aren't running the vCenter server. The vCenter server does not participate in its own automation process of moving things around and putting a system into what's called a maintenance mode will automatically move virtual machines off of it. So it becomes, where you can power it off and not affect anything, but the vCenter server won't move itself. So it's nice if it's on its own system all by itself. It's not part of the cluster. Makes things easier to run. When we get this all set up, I'll try to like block diagram and explain downsides of where the vCenter server would be. Who else do we have? We got people missing. We have Sean's on computer 4. So does he have? He doesn't have it. Right? Yeah, Sean sits. Doesn't Sean Carlson sit right here on 4? Landon, did you have the file?
Yeah.
VCSA? And Caleb, you had it. You had, who else do we have? What about Delton and John? Did y'all remote in? Where do you sit, John? You sit on number 5? I think you sit on number 5, John.
I remoted in, but again, I'm on my PC in the other class, and also my remote PC application just doesn't have the Control-Alt-Delete button in it anymore. I swear.
What version are you running?
One sec.
Let's see.
7.6.77.9. It dropped 4th of January.
See, I thought I just upgraded mine to that version on this computer, and it's not showing the version. What in the heck?
But I did have the Control-Delete the other day because I was using it, and then now all of a sudden, no more.
Huh. That's weird. It's also weird. I'm pretty sure I upgraded mine and now it's back to the old version here. I know I installed the later version. Say I know I installed it. Just finish it and copying over. So the rest of the class, I'm just going to go to each person's machine, especially those that aren't here, and see if you have this VCSA on here. So we can be ready to deploy on Tuesday.